So who am I to think that I'm giving to you? Who are we that we think that we're being so generous with you? For what we have indeed done is we have taken out of your hand and we've put it back in your hand. It's all yours to start with. The richest man who ever lived wrote these words in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3. Honor the Lord from your wealth. If I had to tell you what this principle is that you need to learn today, it is this. Everything belongs to God, even you. Honor the Lord from your wealth. Well, what would keep us from doing that? There would be no reason for me to stand up here and talk about this if that's something that was really a part of everybody's life and it was going on in a constant process. So why would I stand up and talk about, we need to be reminded that we're to honor God with our wealth. And that's because a lot of times we just don't. Sometimes we fall into what I call, in this teaching point 1, the giving fantasy. I had a friend that volunteered to help me this morning. Her name's Katie. Katie, you want to come up? I don't have a microphone. Can I borrow a microphone from you? I'm going to ask her some questions here. This is my friend Katie, and her last name is?
Oakley.
Her last name is Oakley. And we're glad Katie's up here. I told her I wouldn't embarrass her, and I've already done it, and I feel bad about this. I'm going to give Katie a moment of deja vu. Guess what I got here, Katie?
Cookies.
Have I ever given you cookies before on stage?
I feel like you have, but...
Yeah, I have. Right. And it was a lesson on stewardship, right? And I told you that I would give you 10 cookies, and you were going to give me back how many?
Was it 10?
10% of 10 is...
1.
Hey, good. This girl's going to do math.
Yeah.
Now, the reason she's foggy on this is the last time I brought her up here and gave her these cookies was 5 years ago. She didn't look like this. She's a young woman now. She was a little girl. And I want to tell you the rest of that story. I told her, I said, God gives us what we have, and he asked for us to give part of it back to him. And so I brought her up and I said, here's 10 cookies. I want you to give me back 1 cookie. And I'm going to promise, and this is the way God works, you give me back 1 cookie, there'll be 10 cookies tomorrow, and you give me back a cookie, there'll be 10 cookies tomorrow, and give me back a cookie, right? Everybody nod your head if you're with me so far. All right, now, here's where we ended it. She gave me back a cookie, she went and sat down, and what a lot of people don't know about my buddy Katie is after the service was over, she came up to me in the back, and she gave me another cookie. Isn't that sweet? And we really didn't talk about those 9 cookies. I just said they're your cookies, right? But let me ask you a question. Just give me my cookie back, because I'm giving you the cookies. We're going to do this exercise. I get my cookie back. How cool is that, right? These are Snickerdoodle, by the way. They're my second favorite cookie. And so I get my cookie back, and who do those 9 cookies belong to? You're thinking about this way too hard.
Me,
yeah, okay. So I've given you these cookies, but I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not going to eat this cookie, by the way. How many cookies do you think you'll really need today?
Probably just 1.
Probably just 1? Okay, here's your cookie. We'll set it, here you go. So what are you going to do with those 8 cookies?
I would probably give them to other people.
Okay, give them to other people. That is a good answer. Now, before I embarrass her anymore, I'm going to let her go sit down. I'm going to take your cookies from you.
Okay.
Everybody give her a hand. Yeah, it's your cookie. Take as many as you want.
Do you want this one back?
Gee, that was fun. What she said is, she said, okay, I just need 1 cookie, so I'm going to use these 8 cookies and I'm going to give them to other people. I want to challenge you with this idea. What if we took what we needed and we took the rest of them and we said, here's what I want to do. I want to honor God with my wealth. We've talked in this auditorium before about the red box and the black box. We only do one thing at Clear Creek, right? We take people who don't know Jesus, we bring them into a life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ by connecting with God, with one another. What if we took that money or those blessings or whatever it is, and we used it for that box? What if we did that? Now, I was hoping she needed more than one. I'm going to say that, let's say that out of those 9, she needs 7. Okay, I mean, that would be good. I can't imagine her eating 7 because, like me, she's watching her girlish figure. But if she wanted 7, she could keep 7, but guess what? There's 2 more left. What do you do with that? You honor God with that. See, the giving fantasy is this. There's 2 giving fantasies that we fall into a lot of times. We take this blessing, this wealth that God gives us, and we think because we give 10% of it back to God, or whatever percentage you choose to give, that the rest of it, you can do anything in the world you want to do with it. And that's not biblical. Because we're told that we're to honor God with our wealth. And we need to understand that just because we have put money back into God's hands, money that had come from His hand, that the rest of the blessings and the rest of the wealth that we have is also to be used in order to honor God. And the fantasy is that, if I give God His cut, that whatever's left over, I can do anything I want to do with it, and it's okay, and I can live any way I want to live, and I can spend it any way I want to spend it, and that's not biblical. There are people who will give God His cut, and then they'll act in ungodly ways with the rest of that. They'll take more than they need. They'll not share with others. And they'll not consider how it affects the people around them. And the second giving fantasy is kind of plays into this first one. It's not just that, but it's we don't recognize that it all belongs to God anyway. In the 24th Psalm, verse 1, it says, "The earth is the Lord's, and all it contains, the world and those who dwell in it." And sometimes we think, well, no, that 10% belongs to God, but everything else is mine, and I can use it however I want to. And that's not what David says. David, by the inspiration of God, says it's all His. You have to use whatever blessings you have in order to give God glory and honor, because it all belongs to His. All belongs to Him. Romans chapter 14 and verse 8, the Apostle Paul writes this. He says, "For not one of us lives for himself, and not one of us dies for himself. For if we live for the Lord. And if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die," what? We're the Lord's. He owns everything around. He owns us. Therefore, we have to realize that being a Christian changes our lifestyle. It changes our outlook. It changes our priorities. And the giving fantasy says, no, it really doesn't have to change anything. Give God your cut. Live however you want to. And the second giving fantasy is this, that you know what? We give to God and we think we're really giving to Him. How arrogant of us to think that we could give anything to God. It's all His. When I was first in the workforce, I was a teenager, and my brother and I had a summer job. We worked at the Welsh Company. And I don't know if you know anything about the Welsh Company. They made Jenny Lynn baby beds. And my job was I stood at this big press, and I would assemble these headboards and footboards, and I would put them in the press, put them together and nail them, and all day long, just one baby bed, headboard, another one. And I can remember my brother and I were making $6 an hour. Now, that was big money back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and the earth's crust was cooling. That was a lot of money. And we had decided that what we were going to do is we literally were going to tithe. And so neither one of us had a checking account, by the way. So we would go get our checks cashed on Friday, and we would literally set aside $24. We worked 40 hours a week, $6 an hour. Okay. We set aside $24. And we would give it to the church every week. You know how easy that was? It was really easy. But I have found out that the more money I have made and the more responsibility that I have, that becomes harder. And it becomes even harder when I think it's my money. See, that's the giving fantasy. There are people in this room that over the last week and over the last several weeks have been making a decision about how am I going to honor God with my wealth? What am I going to do when it comes to honoring God with what He's blessed me with? And you've done some things that were really leaps of faith and steps of faith, and I want to commend you on that. And if you haven't done that, I want to encourage you to do that. But I tell you what, you will always battle with the problems that go along with wealth and with the idea that you're discontent and the idea that it belongs to you. You will always battle with that until you come to the conclusion that it's God's anyway. And then the last thing we'll talk about, it's been on the board a while, is we have to shift our perception. You know, we've shifted perceptions in every one of these sermons so far, and I'm going to do kind of a rerun real quick of the sermons. The first sermon we talked about, we are rich, therefore that means that we have everything we need to do what God's called us to do. The second lesson is that we have to deal with the things that wealth does to us before we deal with what we do with wealth. The third one is that we live in a consumer culture, and we have to fight the temptation to think that our relationship with God is a transaction. It is not that. It is a relationship. The fourth week, we talked about the 5 P's of giving, but then we said, you know what? The real question here is not can we give or how much should we give, but do we really believe in the mission? Last week, we talked about spiritual disciplines and how giving and stewardship are spiritual disciplines and they are acts of worship. But this week I want us to change our perception in another way. And I want to go back to 1 Timothy chapter 6, and I want to read the first phrase in verse 17. It says this. You'll remember this if you've been here for the sermons. Instruct those who are rich. You see what's in red? In this present world. Let that soak. Let that marinate a minute. Instruct those who are rich in this present world. What's he implying? He's implying this. There's another world. But what you have around you is temporary. The blessings that you're receiving, they're all going to go away someday. And what he's saying to him is he's saying this. When you start thinking about the way you've been blessed, and you start thinking about how you're going to use that blessing to give God glory, you have to remember this. What we do here has eternal consequences. And that's a sobering thought, but it's very true. Why would Jesus talk about money? Why would we talk about how you use your wealth? Because we know that wealth is the greatest competitor for our hearts. And the way we use our wealth, the way we use our talents, the way we use our gifts has eternal consequences. Sometimes they're going to have consequences for these folks that we want to reach out to, people that either have been hurt by the church and have gone away and are now trying to come back, or people who've never had any church relationship, the unchurched people in our community. You know what? The way you use your wealth can have an eternal consequence in their life. But I also want to let you know that the way you use your wealth can have an eternal consequence in your own. It can allow you to focus on what's really important. It will allow you to zero in on who's really in charge. It'll help you decide what really matters. And if you apply this principle to everything else in your life, you'll begin to understand that all we're doing is taking it from his hand and giving it back.